Our values, our tikanga are built on love, whānau, respect. But here's the thing. If our culture, our reo, was really protecting the kids, then why does New Zealand have some of the highest child abuse and infanticide rates in the world?
Blame the bottle, the pipe, the drugs, the pakeha, the system, colonization. We fucking blame everything but ourselves. And
I've been tossing up for ages whether or not to make this video, but today I was at a conference where one of the speakers was just so incredible that it made me think, nah, fuck it. So there's been a bit of a trend lately called Maori Fatique, where people talk about how they're sick of Maori talking about colonization being the reason for lots of the bad statistics. And I chose to clip those two guys' videos because you can tell that their kōrero comes from a place of aroha, but there's some content creators out there that are clearly doing it for clout and for pats on the head from the racists. But these two are doing it in a way where you can tell they really want to reach people and kind of give a bit of tough love to make them do better. So my kōrero is to address some of the racists in the comments who've latched on to this idea of Maori fatigue. My first issue with the Maori fatigue trend is that it unintentionally for some and intentionally for others lumps all Maori into this category of being abusive. So there's around 1 million people who whakapapa Maori, right? And about 5,000 of those are in prison and about 3,000 of those are in state care. That is a really, really small percentage of Maori. And as the bro said, Maori culture through its principles is about aroha, love, manaakitanga, taking care of people, whanaungatanga, building relationships with people. And so in theory, right, that really small percentage of Maori that are in these institutions would be able to be looked after by Maori culture, right? But one of the biggest problems with that is that prison as a system clashes unbelievably hard with Maori culture. The idea of plucking your relative out of the crowd for making a mistake or doing something wrong and biffing them into a box to rot by themselves just does not align. And not only does it not align with Maori culture and principles, it doesn't even really align with British culture because prison has been shown not to reduce crime. And then secondly, we have the state care system, which is when a child gets uplifted out of their whānau and basically put in the custody of the government. And iwi, hapu and whānau Māori have always sat outside of the system and not been included. Māori culture was never allowed to be a part of the state care system. And in 1988, a report came out called Pu Aotearoa, which was an expert panel of Māori who were passionate about the state care system, who said, hey, this system is making things so much worse for Māori children. You're ripping them out of our whānau, not giving us any say on where they go, isolating them by themselves, disconnecting them from whakapapa, from reo, from culture, and then these kids are still getting abused. And the outcomes were way worse for Māori. That report had a whole bunch of recommendations, including saying that the government should hand over care of these kids to the iwi who had been sitting on the sideline for decades saying, please, please, please let us take care of our own kids. We know how to do it. It's been 30 years since that report, and only in the past few years have iwi finally started to be given some of the power to control what happens to these kids. And the racists in the comment like to sit back and say, yeah, look at this Māori stuff, look at the statistics of the Māori in state care, you can't look after your kids. But the government has never ever let iwi have a go. They have been scrapping for decades, for years and years and years on the front lines, doing it for free, saying please let us look after these kids. And instead the government holds on to this power with an iron fist despite sitting on a pile of trash outcomes that have been trashed since the beginning of the system. And Waikato Tainui has finally convinced the government to start handing over some of this power, and they're already blowing the government statistics out of the water. And the speaker that inspired me this morning was this First Nations lady from Canada who's been running their state care stuff over there. The First Nations people over there have said, government, you're fucking trash at looking after kids, we're taking over. And they have. They've got a law passed over there now that says if one of their babies goes into state care, they come in and say, that's our baby, we're taking control. And they have the power and the funding to sort that baby out, to sort the whole whānau out, to put them up in a house, sort some new school uniforms for them, make sure they got enough kai, help with addiction counselling, all those kind of things. That's the Indigenous people running that kaupapa. But in New Zealand, we're stuck in this small box mentality because we've got racists, not the bros in this video, but actual racists who say, you know, Māori culture's worth nothing, te reo doesn't help anything, putting them with Māori whānau does nothing. Meanwhile, Canada's Indigenous people have all come together and said, that's our baby, you're coming with us. And the last thing I want to talk about is this idea of accountability, or pull yourself together and do better. And the accountability stuff I totally get. Everybody is personally responsible for their actions, should take accountability, all of those kind of things. But the part I pause on is when people just say, you just need to do better. because that is exactly what our system says right now. Everyone individually just needs to do better. And that applies to everything. You need to do better to get yourself off the pipe. You need to do better to make your business get off the ground. You need to do better to own more properties. Everything is about you need to do better to sort yourself out. And it's no one else's problem if you fail. The hard part with just saying you need to do better and stopping there is that it ignores what's actually happening in the world. It ignores the fact that some people face huge challenges that other people don't face at all. And I learned how to talk about this stuff the hard way because I used to come home from uni, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and, oh my gosh, this education stuff's so cool. And then would be watching some kind of news article about a crime that a Maori had committed or a kid in state care, and someone in my whānau would say, oh my fucking God, these Maoris got to sort their shit out. And I would say, but did you know that the criminal justice system is racist? And my whānau would turn around and go, no, it's fucking not. Do the crime, do the time. And I'd go, but Māori make up over 50% of the prison population. Scrap. And I realised that conversation actually needed to be a lot more gentler to be able to talk about the fact that police hang out in areas with more brown people, and a Māori man is statistically more likely to be stopped than a Pākehā man, and then questioned, and then searched, and then charged, and then sentenced. And every step of the system has a higher likelihood of that Māori man going through to the next stage. And then that needs to follow with the fact that prison actually doesn't reduce crime, and that prison has been shown to be a mean recruiting ground for gangs, and that 80 to 90% of gang members were in state care, and that state care refused to accept the recommendations of those Māori experts, and so most of those Māori kids grew up disconnected from their Māoritanga. It's when you learn all of these little pieces of information with an open mind that it just starts to click in and think, oh, okay, maybe it's not always as simple as do the crime, do the time, pick your shit up and do better. And once again, that's not what I'm saying that these boys are saying, because I kind of felt who their target audience was, but more so the racists who've jumped in the comments saying Māori culture does nothing. How about you tell the government to let us give it a real go before you write it off? Because if you're writing off Māori culture as worthless, despite the fact that it hasn't actually been allowed anywhere near the people that need support, then that is actually racist. And I know people will say Māori culture should be in the home, we shouldn't need the prison or the state care system for whānau to have access to it. And I agree, that would be totally awesome if every whānau had full immersive access to their culture in the home. But that's not the reality for a lot of whānau, especially the ones who are ripped out of their whānau homes and put in state care with no access to their whakapapa. Lots of these whānau have struggled in a Pākehā system that said nothing but do better, we don't care what happened to you, and are now suffering the consequences of a Pākehā system that says nothing other than do better, we don't give a fuck what you're going through. So we have to ask ourselves, do we want to stick with the status quo and continue supporting a system that says nothing other than do better, you are not my problem and I don't give a fuck how you got here? Or do we want to finally try something new, recommended by the experts, and allow iwi into these spaces who have been sitting on the sidelines for decades screaming, please let us look after our people?